The porcelain tiles felt cold against Maya's back as Jessica's perfectly manicured nails dug into her shoulders, pinning her against the bathroom wall. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the pristine white surfaces of Westfield Academy's second-floor restroom. Maya's dark eyes darted toward the locked door, then back to Jessica's furious face, hovering inches from her own. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" Jessica's voice dripped with venom, her breath hot against Maya's cheek. Behind her, Chloe and Brianna blocked any escape route, their designer uniforms crisp and intimidating in the sterile bathroom light. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs, but something flickered in her expression, something that should have warned Jessica to step back. The quiet girl, everyone dismissed as just another scholarship student, was about to reveal a side of herself that would shatter more than just the suffocating silence of Westfield's elite hallways. But before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maya Chen had always believed that keeping her head down would keep her safe. She was wrong. The confrontation that would change everything started in the most mundane way possible, with a bathroom mirror and Jessica Parker's reflection appearing. Behind her own, Maya had been washing her hands after third period, enjoying the rare moment of solitude in the usually crowded second-floor restroom near the library. The ancient plumbing groaned softly, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear the muffled sounds of students changing classes. She should have noticed the deliberate click of the door lock. She should have paid attention to the sudden silence that fell over the hallway outside. Instead, Maya was lost in thought, still processing the events of her literature class, where she'd accidentally scored higher than Jessica on their latest essay exam. The grade had been announced publicly, and Maya had caught the flash of humiliation that crossed the cheerleader captain's face before it morphed into something far more dangerous. Well, well, look who thinks she's the smartest girl at Westfield. Now, Jessica's voice cut through the quiet like a blade. Maya's eyes snapped up to meet Jessica's in the mirror, and her stomach dropped. Behind the popular girl stood Chloe Williams and Brianna Lee, their expressions eager and predatory. Maya slowly turned around, pressing her back against the cold porcelain sink. The bathroom suddenly felt impossibly small, the walls closing in around her. Jessica took a deliberate step forward, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the harsh fluorescent light. Everything about her screamed privilege and power, from her designer uniform modifications that somehow never earned her a dress code violation, to the subtle makeup that enhanced her natural beauty, to the confidence that came from never having been told no. "I don't want any trouble," Maya said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Her hands gripped the edge of the sink behind her, knuckles white with tension. The words felt hollow, even as she spoke them, echoing off the bathroom tiles like a prayer nobody was listening to. Jessica laughed, a sound devoid of any real humor. "Trouble? Oh, sweetheart, trouble is exactly what you're going to get." She moved closer, and Maya could smell her expensive perfume mixed with the underlying scent of cruelty. You see, there's a natural order to things at Westfield Academy, and little scholarship girls who think they can show up the people who actually belong here need to learn their place. The words hit Maya like physical blows. She'd worked so hard to blend in, to avoid exactly this kind of confrontation. Moving from California to Connecticut had been hard enough without the added pressure of navigating the social minefield of an elite prep school. Her mother had sacrificed everything to get her into Westfield, working double shifts at the hospital to afford even the partial tuition their scholarship didn't cover. Chloe giggled from her position by the door, the sound sharp and cutting. "Maybe we should help her understand the hierarchy around here," she suggested, her voice sing-song and sweet in a way that made Maya's skin crawl. Brianna nodded enthusiastically, her dark eyes gleaming with anticipation. I think that's a wonderful idea. Some people need a more hands-on educational experience. Maya's breathing quickened as the three girls formed a semicircle around her. The bathroom felt like a cage, the locked door sealing her fate. She thought about her promise to her mother, the vow she'd made to avoid any kind of conflict or trouble. But as Jessica reached out to grab her shoulder, Maya realized that sometimes trouble finds you whether you want it or not. What none of them knew was that the quiet girl trembling against the bathroom sink had once been something entirely different. Hidden beneath her carefully constructed facade of timid scholarship student lay a past that would soon explode into the present with devastating consequences. Maya Chen wasn't just another target for Westfield's Queen Bee to torment. She was a former California regional kickboxing champion who had walked away from the sport she loved, carrying secrets that would soon be impossible to keep buried. The fluorescent light flickered ominously overhead as Jessica's grip tightened on Maya's shoulder, and for just a moment, something dangerous flashed in the quiet girl's dark eyes. But Maya forced herself to look down, to remember her mother's words about staying invisible, about not causing problems they couldn't afford to handle. She had no idea that in less than 5 minutes, her carefully maintained invisibility would shatter completely, leaving Westfield Academy's social hierarchy in ruins and 3 popular girls questioning everything they thought they knew about. Power, strength, and the quiet girl they'd chosen as their victim. The bathroom tiles seemed to press closer as tension filled the air like poison gas, and Maya realized with crystal clarity that her old life and her new life were about to collide, in the most spectacular way possible. But Part 2, The World and Players. Westfield Academy stood like a monument to privilege and tradition in the heart of Connecticut's wealthiest suburb. Its red brick buildings and manicured lawns spoke of old money and older traditions, where legacy, admissions, and generous family donations carried more weight than academic achievement or personal character. The school's motto, "Excellence through Heritage," was carved into stone above the main entrance, a daily reminder to students like Maya that some belonged and others were merely tolerated. Maya had been navigating these treacherous social waters for exactly 3 weeks and 2 days. She counted because each day felt like a small victory. Another 24 hours survived in an environment that seemed designed to remind her she didn't belong. The scholarship students were easy to spot. They wore the basic uniform options from the approved catalog rather than the designer modifications the wealthy students favored. They carried used textbooks with highlighted passages and margin notes from previous owners. They ate the cafeteria lunch instead of ordering from the expensive off-campus restaurants that delivered to campus. Jessica Parker, on the other hand, was Westfield Academy royalty. Her family's name was engraved on a bronze plaque in the main hallway, commemorating their substantial donation for the library renovation 5 years earlier. She'd been attending Westfield since kindergarten, moving through the grades with the confidence of someone who knew the game was rigged in her favor. As captain of the varsity cheerleading squad and president of the National Honor Society, Jessica had perfected the art of appearing flawless while destroying anyone who threatened her carefully constructed image. The bathroom where Maya now found herself trapped was on the 2nd floor, tucked away near the library, where fewer students ventured during class periods. It was a strategic choice on Jessica's part, isolated enough to avoid unwanted witnesses, but public enough that word would spread quickly if she wanted it to. The space itself was typical of Westfield's aesthetic, expensive fixtures trying to mask the building's aging infrastructure, mirrors that reflected harsh truths under unforgiving fluorescent lights. Chloe Williams and Brianna Lee flanked Jessica like professional bodyguards, their loyalty purchased through years of reflected popularity and social protection. Chloe came from new money, Her father had made a fortune in tech stocks and used his wealth to buy his daughter a place among Westfield's elite. She was pretty in a delicate, forgettable way, the kind of girl who would disappear without Jessica's validation. Brianna's family owned a chain of upscale restaurants, and she'd learned early that her value lay in being useful to more powerful people. Maya studied their formation with eyes that had been trained to assess opponents and calculate advantages. Even as fear coursed through her veins, part of her mind automatically catalogued their positioning, their body language, their obvious inexperience with actual physical confrontation. These girls were predators, but they were soft predators, accustomed to using words and social pressure rather than their hands. The hierarchy at Westfield was as rigid as any military structure. At the top sat the legacy students, whose families had attended for generations, followed by the wealthy newcomers who'd bought their way in through donations and connections. Below them came the academically gifted scholarship students like Maya, tolerated for their ability to raise the school's test scores and college admission statistics. At the bottom were the day students from middle-class families, desperately trying to maintain their place among their wealthier peers. Maya had understood this system from her first day, when she'd been assigned to orientation with other scholarship recipients. They'd been given a special presentation about representing the school with dignity and remembering their responsibilities as ambassadors for the financial aid program. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The message was clear. Stay quiet, stay grateful, and stay invisible. But invisibility was a luxury Maya could no longer afford. Not with Jessica's perfectly manicured nails digging into her shoulder and the bathroom door locked behind them. The world of Westfield Academy was about to discover that their careful social order could be shattered by someone they dismissed as insignificant. Someone whose past held secrets that could redefine what it meant to be powerful within these privileged walls. The morning sun streamed through the bathroom's single window, casting long shadows across the tile floor. Somewhere in the distance, Maya could hear the muffled sounds of normal school life continuing. Students walking to class, locker doors slamming, the low hum of conversation in the hallways. It felt surreal that life was proceeding normally while her world was about to explode in this sterile, confined space. Jessica's grip tightened, and Maya felt the first spark of something she'd been suppressing for months. It started as a flutter in her chest, a muscle memory of stance and balance that her body remembered even when her mind tried to forget. She forced herself to breathe slowly, to remember her promise to her mother, to think about the consequences of what might happen if she let that spark grow into flame. But as the three girls closed in around her, Maya realized that some promises were impossible to keep, especially when keeping them meant sacrificing everything she was in order to preserve who she was pretending to be. Thus, part 3, the central question. How does a girl who once dominated opponents twice her size end up cowering in a bathroom, desperately trying to disappear into the walls? That question hung in the air like the scent of expensive perfume and barely controlled violence, though none of the 4 girls in that sterile space could have articulated it. Maya Chen carried more contradictions than anyone at Westfield Academy could imagine, and the pressure of maintaining her carefully constructed facade was about to reach a breaking point that would surprise everyone, including herself. Jessica studied Maya's face with the calculating gaze of a predator sensing weakness. What she saw was exactly what Maya wanted her to see. A timid scholarship student, overwhelmed and frightened, exactly the kind of easy target that would provide maximum satisfaction with minimum effort. But there were subtleties in Maya's posture that Jessica's inexperienced eye missed entirely. The way Maya's weight was distributed evenly on both feet, the slight angle of her shoulders that suggested coiled potential rather than resignation. The steadiness of her breathing, despite the obvious fear in her eyes. "You know what I find interesting about you, Maya?" Jessica's voice was conversational now, almost friendly, which somehow made it more menacing than outright hostility. "You're so quiet in class, but then you go and score the highest grade on Professor Martinez's essay exam, almost like you're hiding something." Maya's heart skipped a beat. The essay had been about overcoming personal challenges, and she'd drawn on experiences from her kickboxing career without explicitly mentioning the sport. She'd written about the discipline required to master complex techniques, about learning to channel aggression into focused action, about the mental strength needed to face opponents who underestimated her based on her size and appearance. Professor Martinez had praised her work for its authentic insight into the warrior mindset, never suspecting how literal that description was. "I just study hard," Maya replied, her voice steady despite the chaos in her chest. "There's nothing interesting about that," Brianna laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, but there is something interesting. See, we did a little research after class today. Turns out our quiet little scholarship girl has quite the mysterious past." She pulled out her phone, scrolling through something with theatrical precision. Maya Chen, formerly of Los Angeles, California, homeschooled for the last 2 years of high school, no social media presence, no digital footprint at all, really. "It's almost like you didn't exist before you showed up here." Maya's blood turned to ice water. She'd been so careful, she and her mother both. They'd scrubbed her online presence clean, removed every photo from tournaments, every mention of her success in the Junior Western Regional Championships. Her mother had even convinced the school district to seal her academic records from her. Previous schools, citing family safety concerns related to the divorce. Chloe stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The question is, what is little Maya hiding? Why would someone work so hard to erase their past unless they had something to be ashamed of?" The truth was simultaneously simpler and more complicated than they could imagine. Maya wasn't hiding from shame, she was hiding from herself. The girl who had once stepped into rings with confidence bordering on arrogance, who had dismantled opponents with clinical precision, who had felt truly alive only when facing someone determined to defeat her. That girl had been buried the day she put Rebecca Martinez in the hospital with 3 broken ribs and a concussion, during what was supposed to be a friendly sparring session. The accident had happened during a particularly intense training camp the summer before her junior year. Maya had been preparing for the national championships, working with a new coach who emphasized aggression over her previous instructor's focus on control and discipline. Rebecca was her usual sparring partner, a girl 2 years older and 20 pounds heavier, who had never lost to Maya in practice. But that day, something had been different. Maya had been angry about her parents' deteriorating marriage, about the pressure to perform, about feeling like her worth was measured entirely by her ability to win fights. The combination that ended the sparring session wasn't anything special. Feint to draw Rebecca's guard down, followed by a body shot that should have been pulled at the last second. But Maya hadn't pulled it. She'd driven through with full power, putting everything behind the strike, and the sound of Rebecca's ribs cracking had haunted her dreams for months afterward. Rebecca had recovered eventually. The doctors said she was lucky. The ribs had broken cleanly, and while the concussion was serious, there was no permanent damage. But Maya couldn't forget the look in her friend's eyes in that moment of impact. The way Rebecca's face had gone from confident to confused, to terrified in the space of a heartbeat. She couldn't forget how good it had felt to land that perfect shot, how satisfying it was to see someone who had always been better finally go down. That was what truly terrified Maya about herself. Not that she had hurt someone, but that part of her had enjoyed it. The realization that she carried that capacity for calculated violence, that she could access a cold, clinical mindset that treated other people as problems to be solved rather than human beings to be respected, had driven her to walk away from everything she'd ever loved. Now trapped in this bathroom with three girls who had no idea what they were playing with, Maya felt that familiar coldness starting to creep back into her thoughts. Jessica's grip on her shoulder wasn't just threatening, it was activating. Muscle memories that Maya had spent months trying to suppress. Her body knew how to deal with people who grabbed her. It knew exactly where to strike to make them let go, how to use their momentum against them, how to end confrontations before they truly began. But Maya also knew that giving in to those instincts would destroy everything she and her mother had worked to build. It would confirm every whispered rumor about scholarship students being dangerous, about kids from broken homes bringing violence into elite institutions. It would validate Jessica's belief that Maya didn't belong at Westfield, and worse, it would prove to Maya herself that she was exactly the kind of person she'd promised never to be again. The question wasn't whether Maya could handle Jessica Parker and her followers. The question was whether she could continue to be the person she'd chosen to become, or if the person she'd tried to leave behind would emerge when push inevitably and came to shove. In the harsh, fluorescent light of the bathroom, with Jessica's face inches from her own and nowhere left to run, Maya realized that she was about to find out exactly who she really was underneath all her careful pretending. And that terrified her more than anything Jessica could possibly do to her. Part 4. Character Foundation. Maya's story began not in the sterile halls of Westfield Academy, but in a converted warehouse in East Los Angeles, where the sound of gloves hitting heavy bags provided the soundtrack to her childhood. Her mother, Linda Chen, had enrolled 8-year-old Maya in Master Rodriguez's kickboxing gym, not because she wanted her daughter to become a fighter, but because she needed somewhere safe for Maya to go after school while Linda worked her way through nursing school. The divorce had been ugly and expensive, leaving Linda scrambling to maintain any semblance of stability for her daughter. Maya's father had remarried quickly, starting a new family with a woman barely 10 years older than Maya herself. The child support payments came sporadically, and when they did arrive, they were usually accompanied by criticism about Linda's parenting choices and thinly veiled threats about custody arrangements. Master Rodriguez's gym was worlds away from the elite athletic clubs where wealthy kids learned tennis and swimming. The equipment was patched and repaired rather than replaced. The locker rooms smelled perpetually of sweat and determination. And the students came from neighborhoods where learning to defend yourself wasn't considered optional. But there was something pure about the environment that 8-year-old Maya had recognized instinctively. Here, your worth was determined entirely by your effort and dedication, not by your family's bank account or social connections. Maya had taken to the sport with an intensity that surprised everyone, including herself. While other kids her age were struggling to master basic combinations, Maya was already demonstrating the kind of natural timing and spatial awareness that coaches dream of finding. She seemed to understand intuitively how to read an opponent's movements, how to create openings, how to stay calm under pressure. More importantly, she possessed an almost supernatural work ethic, arriving early for every practice and staying late to work on techniques until Master Rodriguez literally had to turn off the lights to get her to leave. By the time she was 12, Maya was competing at the state level. By 14, she had won her first regional championship. By 16, she was ranked 3rd in the nation in her weight class and division, with college scholarships and potential Olympic development team selection on the horizon. The shy, bookish girl who struggled to speak up in regular classes transformed completely when she stepped into the ring, becoming a calculated predator who dismantled opponents with clinical precision. But success in combat sports requires more than just technical skill. It demands a particular mindset, a willingness to hurt other people in pursuit of victory. Maya's coaches praised her ability to turn off the empathy switch during competition, to view her opponents as obstacles to overcome rather than fellow human beings. They called it having a killer instinct, and Maya had it in abundance. The problem was that the switch became increasingly difficult to turn back on outside the gym. Maya found herself analyzing classmates and teachers through the lens of potential threats, automatically calculating vulnerabilities and attack patterns even during normal conversations. She began to isolate herself socially, partly because her training schedule left little time for friendships, but mostly because she was becoming uncomfortable with how easily she could envision hurting the people around her. The incident with Rebecca Martinez had been the culmination of months of internal pressure and external expectations. Maya's coach had been pushing her to be more aggressive, to finish fights decisively rather than relying on technical superiority. Her parents' divorce proceedings had reached a particularly bitter phase, with both sides using Maya's athletic success as ammunition in their custody battle. She was exhausted from maintaining perfect grades while training 6 days a week, tired of being praised for her ability to hurt people, desperate for someone to see her as more than just a weapon with excellent technique. When Rebecca had smiled at her before that sparring session, making a joke about taking it easy on the younger girl, something inside Maya had snapped. The violence that followed wasn't accidental or uncontrolled. It was coldly deliberate, a demonstration of exactly how much damage she could inflict when she stopped holding back. The satisfaction she felt watching Rebecca crumple to the mat had terrified her more than any opponent ever had. The decision to walk away from competitive fighting had been immediate and non-negotiable. Maya refused to return to the gym, ignored calls from coaches and sponsors, declined invitations to train with the Olympic development team. She threw herself into academic work instead, channeling the same obsessive intensity that had made her a champion fighter into becoming the kind of student who could earn a full scholarship to an elite institution. When Linda received the job offer at Connecticut General Hospital, it felt like divine intervention. The position came with a significant pay increase and, more importantly, the opportunity for both of them to start fresh somewhere nobody knew about Maya's athletic past. They spent weeks scrubbing Maya's online presence, removing photos from tournament websites, convincing her former coaches to delete social media posts featuring her victories. The scholarship to Westfield Academy was the final piece of their reinvention. Maya would be just another academically gifted student from a broken home, working hard to build a better future through education rather than violence. She would learn to fit in with kids who had never thrown a punch in anger, who resolved conflicts through words and social maneuvering rather than physical confrontation. But as Maya stood in that bathroom with Jessica's fingers digging into her shoulder, she realized that some aspects of identity can't be erased simply by changing zip codes and deleting Instagram accounts. The girl who had once dominated regional championships was still there, lurking beneath the surface of her carefully constructed persona, waiting for the right provocation to emerge. The most terrifying part wasn't that Maya might lose control and hurt someone. It was that part of her was eager for the excuse to stop pretending to be helpless. The months of biting her tongue during lectures from entitled classmates, of watching bullies operate with impunity because their parents wrote large checks to the school, of being treated as if her academic achievements were somehow less valid because she needed financial aid to attend. All of that frustration was crystallizing into the familiar cold anger that had once made her unstoppable in competition. Maya looked into Jessica's perfectly made-up face and felt the switch beginning to flip. The empathy that kept her connected to other people's humanity starting to fade into the clinical detachment that had made her a champion. And for the first time in months, she wasn't entirely sure she wanted to stop it from happening. Part 5. The Opposition Force. Jessica Parker had never learned to lose gracefully because she'd rarely been required to lose at all. Born into the kind of generational wealth that brought not just material advantages, but the assumption that the world would arrange itself around her preferences. She had glided through 17 years of life, believing that persistence and privilege could overcome any obstacle. Her parents had donated enough money to Westfield Academy to have a classroom named after them, ensuring that Jessica's academic struggles were met with tutoring rather than consequences, and her social missteps were smoothed over by administrators who understood which families kept the institution financially viable. The Parker family lived in a 12-bedroom mansion overlooking Long Island Sound, where Jessica had grown up surrounded by art, worth more than most people's homes and casual conversations about stock portfolios and real estate investments. Her mother, Patricia, had been captain of the lacrosse team at an elite women's college before marrying into money and dedicating her life to charity galas and social climbing. Her father, Robert, owned an investment firm that managed portfolios for several Fortune 500 companies and politicians whose names regularly appeared in newspaper headlines. Jessica's understanding of power had been shaped by watching her parents operate in elite social circles where influence was measured by the ability to make problems disappear rather than solve them directly. When Patricia was caught plagiarizing portions of a speech for the Hospital Foundation board, the scandal was buried through strategic donations and carefully placed phone calls rather than public accountability. When Robert's firm was investigated for questionable trading practices, the matter was resolved through political connections and regulatory capture rather than legal proceedings. This was the framework through which Jessica interpreted all conflicts. Problems were solved through the application of superior resources and social positioning, not through compromise or personal growth. When she encountered resistance to her will, her first instinct was to escalate the pressure until the resistance collapsed, using whatever advantages her family's status provided. At Westfield Academy, Jessica had carefully constructed an image that balanced academic achievement with social dominance. She maintained a 3.8 GPA through a combination of natural intelligence, expensive tutoring, and professors who understood the value of keeping donor families satisfied. Her leadership positions in student government and various clubs were partly earned through legitimate effort, but mostly secured through her family's financial contributions and her ability to deliver votes from other wealthy students. The cheerleading squad that Jessica captained was less an athletic team than a social enforcement mechanism, a carefully curated group of girls who had learned that their own status depended entirely on maintaining Jessica's approval. She selected members not just for their physical appearance or athletic ability, but for their willingness to participate in the complex social warfare that dominated elite teenage hierarchies. Chloe and Brianna had proven themselves particularly useful in this regard, demonstrating both the loyalty and moral flexibility that Jessica valued in her inner circle. But underneath the confidence and carefully maintained perfection, Jessica carried anxieties that she worked desperately to hide from everyone around her. Despite her advantages, she struggled academically in ways that tutoring and family influence couldn't entirely address. Her SAT scores were respectable, but not exceptional, a reality that threatened her assumptions about attending an Ivy League university as a legacy admission. Her college counselor had begun making diplomatically worded suggestions about considering backup options and less competitive programs, phrases that Jessica interpreted as direct attacks on her fundamental identity. The literature essay that had triggered her confrontation with Maya represented everything Jessica feared about her own limitations. She'd spent hours crafting what she believed was a sophisticated analysis of character motivation and thematic development, drawing on techniques her expensive tutor had taught her and literary criticism she'd found online. When Professor Martinez returned the papers with Maya's essay earning the highest grade in the class, Jessica felt something more than jealousy. She experienced a fundamental challenge to her understanding of how the world was supposed to work. Maya's essay had been raw and authentic in ways that Jessica's careful construction couldn't match. Where Jessica had written about fictional characters overcoming adversity, Maya had clearly drawn from personal experience with real struggle and genuine triumph. The difference in quality was obvious to anyone who read both papers, and that obviousness was what Jessica found most threatening of all. Jessica's response to this academic humiliation followed the same pattern she'd learned from watching her. Parents handle challenges, identify the threat, isolate it from potential sources of support, and apply increasing pressure until compliance was achieved. Maya's scholarship status and lack of social connections made her an ideal target for this approach. Jessica had correctly calculated that Maya couldn't afford to fight back through official channels, since any disciplinary action could jeopardize her financial aid and academic standing. What Jessica had failed to consider was that Maya might possess resources and capabilities that existed entirely outside the social and economic frameworks that Jessica understood. Her worldview simply didn't include the possibility that someone without money or family connections might have other forms of power, particularly the kind of physical capability that could render social hierarchies irrelevant in a matter of seconds. Chloe and Brianna represented different but equally important types of social support for Jessica's dominance. Chloe's family had bought their way into Westfield's elite circles through technology wealth, making her perpetually insecure about her acceptance among families with generational connections to the school. Her loyalty to Jessica was motivated by genuine fear of social exile, making her particularly vicious in her attacks on anyone Jessica designated as a threat. Brianna's family restaurant empire had given her a more sophisticated understanding of power dynamics and social manipulation. She had learned early that success often depended on identifying and exploiting other people's weaknesses, making her especially skilled at psychological warfare. Her role in Jessica's group was to provide the intelligence and strategic thinking, and that complemented Jessica's instinctive ruthlessness. Together, the three girls had developed a system of harassment and intimidation that had proven effective against previous targets. They understood how to use social media, rumor campaigns, and selective exclusion to make their victims' lives miserable while maintaining plausible deniability about their involvement. They were particularly skilled at provoking reactions that could be used to justify escalated responses, creating situations where their targets appeared to be the aggressors while they positioned themselves as innocent victims. But their experience had been limited to opponents who played by the same social rules they understood. They had never faced someone who might respond to psychological pressure with physical action, someone for whom their family's wealth and connections provided no protection whatsoever. They were about to discover that in certain contexts, the power they had wielded so effectively became not just useless, but actively dangerous. Jessica tightened her grip on Maya's shoulder, interpreting the quiet girl's apparent submission as evidence that their strategy was working perfectly. She had no way of knowing that Maya's stillness wasn't fear. It was the calm before a storm that would shatter everything Jessica thought she understood about power, control, and the consequences of choosing the wrong person to victimize. In the fluorescent-lit bathroom that would become the site of Jessica's education in the limits of privilege, Three wealthy teenagers were about to learn that some people fight back in ways that money can't buy, influence can't stop, and social status can't protect against. Part 6. Internal struggle setup. Maya's mind fractured into competing voices as Jessica's grip tightened on her shoulder, each internal argument pulling her toward a different version of herself. The loudest voice belonged to her mother, echoing conversations they'd had during the long drive from California to Connecticut, when Linda had made Maya promise over and over again that this time would be different, that they would both commit to building normal, peaceful lives, free from the violence that had defined Maya's teenage years. "Promise me, sweetheart," Linda had said, gripping the steering wheel as they crossed into yet another state Maya had never seen before. "Promise me that you'll walk away from any situation that might escalate. We can't afford another incident. We can't afford to run again." Maya had promised, meaning it completely in that moment. She'd been so tired of being afraid of her own capabilities, exhausted by the constant vigilance required to monitor her emotional state and physical responses to stress. The version of herself she'd been trying to build over the past 3 months was softer, more vulnerable, more recognizably human. She liked the girl who spent her evenings reading literature instead of studying fight footage, who worried about essay grades instead of tournament rankings, who fell asleep to the sound of rain against her bedroom window instead of replaying combinations in her head. But another voice was rising now, one that had been whispering in the background since the first day she'd walked through Westfield's hallowed halls and seen how casually the wealthy students dismissed anyone they considered beneath their notice. This voice remembered what it felt like to be feared instead of pitied, respected instead of tolerated. It reminded her that she had once been someone who never had to beg for mercy or hope that authority figures would protect her from predators. The most insidious voice was the coldly analytical one that had made her such an effective fighter in competition. It was already cataloging Jessica's positioning, noting the way her weight was distributed unevenly, identifying the vulnerable targets that a well-placed strike could exploit. It calculated the distance to the bathroom door, assessed Chloe and Brianna's likely reactions to sudden violence, developed contingency plans for multiple scenarios. This voice didn't care about promises to her mother or scholarship requirements, or the delicate social ecosystem she'd been trying to navigate. It cared only about efficiency and effectiveness, about ending threats in the most direct way possible, and it was growing stronger with each second that Jessica maintained her aggressive posture. Maya closed her eyes for a moment, trying to center herself the way Master Rodriguez had taught her during meditation sessions that seemed like they'd happened in someone else's life. She tried to access the calm, controlled mindset that had allowed her to compete at the highest levels without losing herself to rage or fear. But the breathing techniques that had once brought her peace now only reminded her of the pre-fight rituals she'd abandoned, the mental preparation that had preceded moments of calculated violence. "Are you listening to me?" Jessica's voice cut through Maya's internal struggle like a blade. "I said, I think you need to understand exactly where you fit in the social order around here." Maya opened her eyes and found herself looking directly into Jessica's face from only inches away. The closer proximity allowed her to see details she'd missed before, the slight tremor in Jessica's perfectly applied eyeliner that suggested nervousness beneath the aggressive facade, the way her breathing had quickened despite her attempts to project complete control, the micro-expressions that revealed someone who had never been in a real physical confrontation before. The analytical voice in Maya's head provided a running commentary. Jessica was trying to intimidate through proximity and verbal aggression, but she had no real understanding of how to control or dominate another person physically. Her grip on Maya's shoulder was tight enough to be uncomfortable, but positioned poorly for actual restraint. If Maya chose to move, Jessica would be unable to stop her without escalating to methods she clearly wasn't prepared to use. But Maya also recognized something else in Jessica's behavior, the desperate edge of someone whose identity was threatened by circumstances beyond their control. Jessica's aggression wasn't just meanness for its own sake, it was a response to having her assumptions about the world challenged in ways she didn't know how to process. Maya's academic success had revealed cracks in Jessica's carefully constructed self-image, and like any cornered animal, she was lashing out at the perceived source of the threat. Understanding Jessica's motivation didn't make her behavior acceptable, but it did complicate Maya's moral calculus. The voice that belonged to her mother reminded her that Jessica was ultimately just another privileged teenager acting out because she'd never learned healthy ways to cope with disappointment. Responding with violence would be disproportionate and wrong, regardless of how satisfying it might feel in the moment. But the fighter's voice argued back with cold logic. Jessica had initiated physical contact without consent, had cornered Maya in an isolated location, and was clearly escalating toward more serious harassment. Self-defense wasn't just permitted in such circumstances, it was morally required. Maya had every right to protect herself, and the most effective protection would ensure that Jessica never considered targeting her again. Maya tried to imagine how this scene would play out if she continued to follow her mother's advice. She would submit to whatever humiliation Jessica had planned, hoping that compliance would satisfy her attacker's need for dominance. Word would spread through Westfield's social networks that Maya was an easy target, inviting future harassment from Jessica and others who enjoyed tormenting vulnerable students. Her remaining time at the academy would become a constant series of degradations and power plays, each one chipping away at her sense of self-worth until she became exactly the broken, defeated person that Jessica believed her to be. The alternative scenario played out differently in Maya's imagination. She could end this confrontation in seconds, using techniques so ingrained in her muscle memory that they required no conscious thought. Jessica would learn that some people couldn't be intimidated through social pressure and physical posturing. Word would spread through different networks, whispered conversations about the quiet scholarship girl who had shocked everyone by refusing to be a victim. But Maya also knew that choosing violence would validate every stereotype about kids, from broken homes bringing danger into elite institutions. It would confirm Jessica's belief that people like Maya didn't belong at Westfield, that they were inherently destructive forces that threatened the civilized order of privilege and entitlement. Worse, it would prove to Maya herself that she was exactly the person she'd been trying so hard not to be. Someone whose first instinct was to solve problems through calculated application of force. The internal war raged on multiple levels simultaneously. Maya's conscious mind understood the long-term consequences of different choices, weighing scholarship requirements against personal dignity, future opportunities against immediate safety. But her body was operating on more primitive frequencies, responding to threat signals with physiological changes that prepared her for violent action, whether her rational mind approved or not. Her heart rate had increased, flooding her system with adrenaline that sharpened her focus and heightened her awareness of everything happening around her. Her muscles had tensed in familiar patterns, shifting her weight distribution and centering her balance in ways that would allow for explosive movement. Her breathing had deepened and slowed, maximizing oxygen intake while maintaining the rhythm she'd trained herself to use during pre-fight preparation. Maya realized with growing alarm that her body was making the choice for her, activating systems that had been dormant for months, but were apparently just waiting for the right stimulus to emerge. She felt like she was watching herself from outside, observing the transformation from nervous scholarship student to something far more dangerous, with a mixture of fascination and horror. Jessica seemed to sense the change in Maya's energy, though she clearly didn't understand what it meant. Her grip on Maya's shoulder shifted slightly, becoming less aggressive and more uncertain. For just a moment, doubt flickered across her perfectly made-up features, the first crack in her facade of complete control. "Maybe we should just talk about this," Chloe said suddenly, her voice higher than usual. She had positioned herself near the bathroom door, but was now shifting nervously from foot to foot, as if some instinct was warning her that the situation was developing in unexpected directions. Brianna shot Chloe a sharp look, clearly annoyed by any suggestion of backing down from their planned intimidation. Talk about what? There's nothing to discuss. Some people need to learn their place, and apparently Maya here needs a more direct education than most. But Maya could see that Brianna's confidence was also wavering. The girl's eyes kept darting between Maya's face and her posture, picking up on subtle signals that her conscious mind couldn't quite interpret, but that triggered primal warnings about predators and prey. These girls had spent their lives as social predators, using wealth and status to dominate their peers, but they had no experience with actual physical danger. Maya felt a moment of sympathy for them, recognizing how unprepared they were for the reality they were creating. They had initiated a confrontation with someone whose capabilities they couldn't begin to comprehend, operating from assumptions about power and control that would prove catastrophically wrong if Maya chose to abandon her attempts at peaceful resolution. The sympathy was immediately overwhelmed by a surge of anger that surprised Maya with its intensity. These girls had cornered her in an isolated location, physically restrained her against her will, and were now discussing her humiliation as if she were an object rather than a person. They felt entitled to treat her this way because they believed their social status insulated them from any meaningful consequences. Maya thought about all the scholarship students who had come before her at Westfield, all the kids from working-class families who had endured harassment and degradation because they needed the education more than they needed their dignity. She thought about the careful balance required to maintain financial aid while navigating social hierarchies designed to exclude people like her. She thought about her mother working double shifts to cover their portion of tuition, while girls like Jessica complained about not getting the right color Range Rover for their 16th birthday. The anger crystallized into something colder and more focused than simple rage. Maya realized that this moment wasn't just about her personal safety or dignity. It was about whether kids like Jessica could continue operating with impunity, secure in their belief that wealth and connections would always protect them from the consequences of their cruelty. "You're right," Maya said quietly, her voice so calm that it seemed to echo strangely in the tiled bathroom. "Some people do need to learn their place." Jessica smiled triumphantly, interpreting Maya's words as submission. "I'm glad you're finally starting to understand how things work around here. Now, I think we should start with..." Maya's transformation happened so quickly that Jessica's brain couldn't process what her eyes were seeing. The nervous, trembling girl who had been pressed against the bathroom sink simply disappeared, replaced by someone whose every movement radiated controlled precision and deadly competence. Maya's stance shifted into perfect fighting position, faster than thought. Her weight balanced, her hands positioned for offense or defense, her entire body language communicating that she was no longer a victim waiting to be rescued, but a predator who had decided to reveal her true nature. Jessica's grip on Maya's shoulder suddenly felt like she was trying to restrain a live electrical wire. Maya didn't pull away or struggle against the contact. She simply became someone that Jessica's instincts screamed was extremely dangerous to touch. The cheerleader's hand dropped away involuntarily, her body reacting to threat signals that her conscious mind was still trying to deny. "What I understand," Maya continued in the same unnaturally calm voice, "is that you've made a very serious mistake. You assumed that being quiet meant being weak. You thought that needing financial aid meant I would accept abuse rather than risk losing my scholarship. You believed that 3 against 1 were odds that guaranteed your victory. Chloe had pressed herself against the bathroom door as if trying to melt through it. Her earlier nervousness transformed into obvious fear. Brianna had taken several steps backward, putting distance between herself and whatever Maya was becoming. Even Jessica, despite her attempts to maintain her aggressive posture, had unconsciously shifted away from direct confrontation. Maya could see her reflection in the bathroom mirror behind Jessica's head, and what she saw there both thrilled and terrified her. The girl looking back at her was someone she remembered, but had thought she'd successfully buried months ago. Her eyes held the cold calculation of someone who viewed other people as tactical problems to be solved, rather than fellow human beings deserving of compassion. Her posture radiated the quiet confidence of someone who had never lost a physical confrontation and had no intention of starting now. This was the version of herself that Maya had walked away from after the incident with Rebecca Martinez. This was the fighter who had dominated regional competitions through a combination of technical excellence and psychological intimidation. This was the person her mother feared she might become again if they couldn't successfully reinvent their lives in Connecticut. But standing in that bathroom, surrounded by 3 girls who had chosen to corner her like a trapped animal, Maya found herself questioning whether trying to suppress this part of her identity had been the right choice. These girls had assumed they could hurt her without consequences because they believed she was helpless. They had miscalculated badly, and now they were about to receive an education in the difference between perceived weakness and actual vulnerability. The internal voices that had been warring in Maya's head suddenly fell silent, replaced by the crystal-clear focus that had once made her unstoppable in competition. She wasn't making a conscious decision to fight. She was simply allowing herself to become who she actually was, beneath all the careful pretending. Jessica opened her mouth to say something. Probably another threat or demand, but the words died in her throat as she finally registered the change in Maya's demeanor. For the first time in her privileged life, Jessica Parker found herself face to face with someone who possessed power that couldn't be bought, influenced, or intimidated into submission. Maya smiled, and it was not a friendly expression. Would you like to know what I learned during those 2 years I was homeschooled? Would you like to understand why there's no digital footprint from my time in California? The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as 3 wealthy teenagers realized they had cornered something far more dangerous than a helpless scholarship student. In the sterile bathroom, where they had planned to humiliate an easy target, they were about to discover that some people's quiet exterior conceals capabilities that can shatter social hierarchies in a matter of seconds. Maya's hands had found their familiar positions without any conscious direction, her body remembering techniques that months of academic focus hadn't been able to erase. The girl who had once been ranked 3rd in the nation was still there, waiting beneath the surface of her carefully constructed persona for exactly this kind of provocation. The promise she had made to her mother seemed very far away now, overshadowed by the immediate reality of 3 aggressors who had chosen to corner her in an isolated location. Maya had tried to be the person Linda wanted her to become, the peaceful student who solved problems through words and patience rather than violence. But some situations couldn't be resolved through accommodation and submission. Jessica, Chloe, and Brianna were about to learn that choosing the wrong target could have consequences that their wealthy families couldn't buy their way out of. In the next few seconds, the careful social order of Westfield Academy would be shattered by someone they had dismissed as insignificant. and Maya Chen would have to decide whether the person she'd been trying to become was worth preserving at the cost of everything she was. The bathroom tiles felt solid beneath Maya's feet as she prepared to show 3 privileged bullies exactly why quiet people sometimes have the most devastating responses to aggression. The transformation was complete, and there would be no going back to pretending she was someone else. Maya looked into Jessica's widening eyes and realized that the moment of decision had passed. She was no longer choosing between different versions of herself. She was simply accepting who she had always been beneath the careful disguise of helplessness. The real Maya Chen was about to emerge, and Westfield Academy would never be the same. The sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway outside the bathroom, a reminder that normal school life was continuing just beyond the locked door, where 4 girls stood frozen in a moment that would define all their futures. Maya could hear the distant chatter of students heading to 4th period, the slam of metal lockers, the familiar rhythm of academic life proceeding as if the world hadn't just shifted on its axis. Mrs. Henderson's voice drifted from the classroom next door as she began her advanced placement biology lecture, her words about cellular respiration creating a surreal soundtrack to the tension crackling in the confined space. Maya found herself cataloging these sounds with the hyper-awareness that came from her fighter's training, her mind automatically mapping the environment and calculating how much time she had before someone might discover what was happening in this sterile prison. The bathroom itself seemed to press in around them, its institutional white tiles reflecting the harsh fluorescent lighting in ways that made everything feel stark and unforgiving. Maya noticed details she'd never paid attention to before, the way the mirrors were slightly warped at the edges, creating distorted reflections that made Jessica's face look even more predatory than it actually was. The faint chemical smell of industrial cleaning products mixed with expensive perfumes and the metallic tang of fear-induced adrenaline. Jessica had chosen this location carefully, Maya realized. The second-floor bathroom near the library was isolated during class periods, far from the main administrative offices where teachers and staff might intervene. It was a calculated decision, proof that Jessica had planned this confrontation rather than acting on spontaneous anger. The locked door ensured privacy for whatever humiliation she had orchestrated, but it also meant that Maya was truly trapped with 3 people who had demonstrated their willingness to use physical intimidation to achieve their goals. The realization that this was premeditated rather than impulsive shifted something fundamental in Maya's understanding of the situation. Jessica hadn't cornered her in a moment of emotional overflow. She had methodically planned to isolate and threaten another student, confident that her social status would protect her from any meaningful consequences. This wasn't a teenage argument that had gotten out of hand. It was a deliberate exercise of power designed to terrorize someone Jessica viewed as inherently inferior. Maya's enhanced awareness picked up on subtle environmental cues that reinforced her growing sense of isolation. The bathroom's acoustic properties meant that sounds from inside would be muffled to anyone passing in the hallway, while voices from outside were clearly audible to them. It was a perfect setup for psychological intimidation. The victims could hear normal life continuing just beyond their reach, while being unable to call for help without risking escalation from their attackers. The timing was equally strategic. 4th period was advanced placement classes for upperclassmen, meaning the hallways would be largely empty until the period ended in 45 minutes. Jessica had calculated that they would have nearly an hour to conduct their campaign of harassment without interruption, more than enough time to reduce Maya to tears and establish the kind of psychological dominance that would ensure her continued submission. But Jessica's careful planning had been based on assumptions about Maya's character and capabilities that were proving catastrophically wrong. The isolation that was supposed to make Maya feel helpless was actually working in her favor. removing witnesses who might complicate her response to their aggression. The locked door that was meant to prevent her escape also prevented Jessica and her followers from retreating when they realized they had miscalculated. Maya could see the growing uncertainty in Chloe's body language as the girl pressed herself against the bathroom door, her earlier confidence evaporating as she began to understand that their usual tactics weren't producing the expected results. Chloe had participated in social harassment campaigns before, but always against targets who responded predictably, breaking down in tears, begging for mercy, or simply enduring abuse in hopes that submission would eventually satisfy their tormentors. Maya's transformation into someone who radiated controlled violence was outside Chloe's experience entirely. The girl had never encountered someone who responded to intimidation by becoming more dangerous rather than more frightened. Her instincts were screaming warnings that her conscious mind couldn't quite process, creating a cognitive dissonance that left her frozen and uncertain. Brianna had backed toward the row of sinks, putting distance between herself and the confrontation, while maintaining a position that would allow her to escape if necessary. Her restaurant family had given her more sophisticated understanding of power dynamics than Chloe possessed, and she was beginning to recognize that their carefully planned harassment campaign was developing in ways they hadn't anticipated. The social ecosystem of Westfield Academy had created an environment where students like Jessica operated with near total impunity, protected by family wealth and institutional relationships that made challenging their behavior extremely risky for anyone without similar advantages. Faculty members understood which families wrote the largest donation checks and adjusted their disciplinary decisions accordingly. Administrators were more concerned with maintaining the school's reputation among wealthy donors than with protecting individual students from harassment. Maya had observed this system in operation during her 3 weeks at the academy, watching as complaints about bullying were dismissed or redirected into mediation sessions that inevitably favored students with family connections. She'd seen scholarship recipients learn to accept degrading treatment rather than risk losing their financial aid by filing formal complaints against the children of major donors. The guidance counselors who were supposed to provide support for struggling students were overwhelmed and underfunded, their offices located in the basement of the oldest building where the wealthy families wouldn't have to see evidence of their children's victims. Maya had tried to schedule an appointment with Miss Thompson during her first week, hoping to discuss the social challenges of adjusting to Westfield's culture, but had been told that the earliest available slot was 6 weeks away. Even the physical layout of the school reinforced the hierarchy that protected students like Jessica. The newest buildings housed the advanced classes taken primarily by legacy students, with state-of-the-art technology and comfortable furniture that created an atmosphere of privilege and entitlement. The older sections where scholarship students took remedial courses were shabby and outdated, with broken desks and inadequate heating that sent a clear message about relative worth. Maya had learned to navigate these spaces carefully, avoiding areas where wealthy students congregated and timing her movements to minimize contact with potential aggressors. But Jessica's decision to corner her in an isolated bathroom demonstrated that no amount of careful avoidance could protect someone who had been marked as a target by Westfield's social elite. The absence of any meaningful adult supervision or intervention system meant that students like Maya were essentially on their own when confronted by harassment. The teachers who might have helped were either unaware of what was happening or unwilling to risk their positions by challenging students whose families had significant influence over school policies. Maya thought about her mother working a double shift at the hospital, completely unaware that her daughter was trapped in a bathroom, being threatened by 3 girls whose families could destroy their carefully rebuilt lives with a few strategic phone calls. Linda had sacrificed everything to give Maya this opportunity, working exhausting hours to cover their portion of the tuition while believing that her daughter was safely building a better future through education. The irony was devastating. Maya's mother had insisted they move to Connecticut specifically to escape the violence that had defined Maya's teenage years in California. Linda had believed that surrounding Maya with privileged kids who had never known real hardship would provide a stabilizing influence, teaching her daughter to resolve conflicts through words and social positioning rather than physical confrontation. But the environment Linda had worked so hard to access was proving just as brutal as anything Maya had experienced in East Los Angeles, with the added dimension of institutional protection for the aggressors. At least in her old neighborhood, bullies operated without pretense. They used violence because they enjoyed it, not because they believed their social status gave them the right to terrorize anyone they considered inferior. Jessica's sense of entitlement was far more dangerous than simple sadism because it was reinforced by every aspect of Westfield's culture. She genuinely believed that her family's wealth gave her the right to humiliate scholarship students, and her previous experiences had confirmed that belief by demonstrating that her actions would face no meaningful consequences. The bathrooms, institutional atmosphere seemed to amplify the fundamental unfairness of Maya's situation. The sterile white tiles and harsh lighting created an environment that felt more like a prison cell than a school facility, reinforcing the sense that she was trapped in a system designed to break anyone who didn't belong to the privileged elite. Maya could hear her own heartbeat echoing in her ears, the sound mixing with the electrical hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant murmur of normal school activities. The contrast between the ordinary sounds of academic life and the extraordinary tension in their confined space created a sense of unreality, as if they had all stepped outside the normal flow of time and consequence. She thought about all the other scholarship students who had stood in similar situations, faced with the choice between accepting humiliation or fighting back against opponents whose families could destroy their futures with a single phone call. To the admissions office, how many had chosen submission, swallowing their dignity in hopes of preserving their educational opportunities? How many had been quietly expelled or had their financial aid mysteriously revoked after daring to challenge their social superiors? The environmental pressures that surrounded Maya weren't just physical, they were psychological, social, and economic, all designed to ensure that students like her understood their place in Westfield's hierarchy. The bathroom where she now stood represented the culmination of those pressures, the final test of whether she would accept her assigned role as a victim or risk everything to defend her basic human dignity. Jessica's confident smile began to waver as she realized that Maya's transformation wasn't temporary or performative. The quiet scholarship student who had been pressed against the bathroom sink was gone, replaced by someone whose presence filled the confined space with an energy that made the air itself feel dangerous. The carefully planned harassment campaign that was supposed to establish Jessica's dominance had instead revealed capabilities in Maya that threatened to overturn everything Jessica thought she understood about power and control. Maya could see the exact moment when Jessica began to understand that she had made a serious miscalculation. The cheerleader's eyes widened slightly as her brain finally processed the threat signals that her body had been detecting for the past several minutes. But by then, it was too late to de-escalate or retreat. The locked door and isolated location that had been chosen to facilitate Maya's humiliation now trapped all four of them in a situation that was spiraling beyond anyone's control. The environmental pressures that were supposed to ensure Maya's submission had instead created the perfect conditions for her to reveal exactly who she was beneath the careful facade of helplessness. In trying to corner a victim, Jessica had instead cornered a predator who was no longer interested in pretending to be prey. The bathroom tiles seemed to vibrate with tension as Maya prepared to show three privileged girls exactly what happened when they chose the wrong person to isolate and threaten. The sterile institutional environment that was meant to reinforce their sense of superiority would instead become the stage for their education in the limits of social power, when confronted by someone who possessed capabilities that money couldn't. Ibayan status couldn't intimidate. Maya's reflection in the warped bathroom mirror showed a girl who had finally stopped running from who she really was, and Jessica Parker was about to discover that some people's quiet exterior conceals something far more dangerous than she had ever imagined possible. The silence in the bathroom stretched like a taut wire, vibrating with tension that seemed to make the air itself dense and difficult to breathe. Maya stood perfectly still, her transformation complete, no longer the trembling scholarship student who had been washing her hands just minutes earlier. The girl facing Jessica now was someone else entirely, someone whose very presence had shifted the fundamental dynamics of power in that sterile, fluorescent-lit space. Jessica's carefully planned harassment campaign crumbled as she found herself staring into eyes that held no fear, no submission, no recognition of the social hierarchy that had always protected her from consequences. Maya's gaze was steady and evaluating, the look of someone assessing a tactical situation rather than pleading for mercy. It was a look Jessica had never seen directed at her before, and it triggered primitive alarm systems in her brain that she didn't know how to interpret. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Maya said, her voice carrying an odd formality that made every word feel significant. "You seem to believe that being wealthy makes you powerful. You think that having influential parents means you can treat other people however you choose. You've confused privilege with strength." Chloe whimpered softly from her position pressed against the bathroom door, her earlier eagerness to participate in Maya's humiliation completely evaporated. She kept looking between Maya and Jessica as if watching a tennis match, except the stakes were higher than any game she'd ever witnessed. The confident, mean girl who had helped plan this confrontation was gone, replaced by a frightened teenager who suddenly understood that she was trapped in a situation that had spiraled far beyond her experience or comfort level. Brianna had gone completely still near the sinks, her restaurant family's understanding of power dynamics finally providing clarity about what was happening. She recognized the shift in Maya's demeanor for what it was, not fear transforming into desperation, but restraint being deliberately abandoned. Brianna had seen similar transformations in the kitchen staff when pushed too far by abusive customers, moments when professional composure gave way to something far more authentic and dangerous. "You don't understand who you're dealing with," Jessica managed to say, though her voice lacked the commanding authority she'd maintained throughout the confrontation. For the first time in her life, she was face to face with someone who seemed genuinely unimpressed by her family's wealth and social status. Someone who looked at her without the mixture of envy and deference she was accustomed to receiving. Maya tilted her head slightly, a gesture that somehow conveyed both curiosity and predatory interest. "You're absolutely right. I don't think any of you understand who you're dealing with. Let me help clarify the situation for you." What happened next occurred faster than conscious thought could follow. Maya moved with the fluid precision of someone whose body had been trained to function as a weapon, every motion economical and devastatingly effective. Jessica had been reaching toward Maya's shoulder again, perhaps trying to re-establish physical dominance or simply acting on autopilot, when Maya's response demonstrated exactly how outmatched they all were. Maya's hand intercepted Jessica's wrist with casual ease, applying just enough pressure to immobilize the limb without causing damage. The technique was so smooth and controlled that it looked almost choreographed, but Jessica's sharp intake of breath made it clear that the pain was very real. Maya had found the precise pressure point that would render Jessica's arm temporarily useless while avoiding any injury that might require medical attention. This is called a basic wrist control technique, Maya explained conversationally, as if she were teaching a class rather than demonstrating her capabilities on an unwilling subject. It's designed to neutralize aggressive behavior without causing permanent harm. I learned it when I was 12 years old. Jessica's eyes went wide with shock and pain, her mouth opening and closing silently as she tried to process what was happening to her. She had never experienced physical helplessness before, never felt her body controlled by someone else's superior knowledge and skill. The sensation was terrifying and humiliating in ways she had no framework for understanding. Now, I could escalate this in several different directions, Maya continued, her voice maintaining the same calm, educational tone. I could transition to a shoulder lock that would put you on the ground in about 2 seconds. I could target pressure points that would make you question every decision you've ever made. Or I could simply demonstrate some of the striking techniques I spent 6 years perfecting. Chloe let out a small, strangled sound that might have been an attempt at protest or simply an expression of terror. She had pulled out her phone at some point, probably planning to record Maya's humiliation for social media distribution, but now the device hung forgotten in her trembling hands. The video she had expected to capture, a scholarship student breaking down under pressure from her social superiors, had been replaced by something she couldn't have imagined and definitely didn't want preserved on film. Brianna found her voice first, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Maya, we didn't know. We thought you were just..." She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence, because completing it would require acknowledging exactly how badly they had miscalculated. "You thought I was just what?" Maya asked, increasing the pressure on Jessica's wrist just enough to make her point. "Helpless? Defenseless? The kind of person you could corner in a bathroom and terrorize for your own entertainment?" Jessica tried to pull away, but Maya's grip was unbreakable without causing herself significant injury in the process. The cheerleader captain, who had dominated Westfield's social hierarchy through force of personality and family influence, was learning what it felt like to be completely powerless, to have her physical autonomy controlled by someone else's superior capabilities. "I competed in regional championships for 4 years, Maya said, her words dropping into the silence like stones into still water. "I was ranked 3rd in the nation in my division before I walked away from the sport. I've faced opponents who were older, stronger, and more experienced than me, and I've never lost a fight that mattered." The revelation hung in the air like a physical presence, recontextualizing everything that had happened since Maya first entered Westfield Academy. Her quiet demeanor, her academic focus, her careful avoidance of confrontation, all of it took on new meaning when viewed through the lens of someone who possessed the physical capability to end conflicts decisively, but had chosen restraint instead. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Chloe asked, her voice high and tight with stress. "Why would you hide something like that?" Maya's expression softened slightly, though she maintained her hold on Jessica's wrist. "Because I promised my mother I would try to be someone different, because I wanted to prove that I could solve problems without violence. Because I hoped that maybe, in a place like this, surrounded by educated people from good families, I wouldn't need to be a fighter anymore." The admission revealed layers of complexity that none of them had expected from the quiet scholarship student. Maya wasn't just someone who happened to possess dangerous skills. She was someone who had actively chosen to suppress those abilities in pursuit of a different kind of life. Her transformation in the bathroom wasn't an explosion of hidden aggression. It was the deliberate abandonment of a persona she had been struggling to maintain. Jessica finally found her voice, though it came out as more of a croak than her usual. Commanding tone. "You're hurting me." "No," Maya corrected matter-of-factly. "I'm restraining you. If I wanted to hurt you, you would know the difference immediately and unmistakably. What you're experiencing right now is discomfort designed to discourage further aggressive behavior. It's what I should have done the moment you put your hands on me without permission." The distinction was important in ways that went beyond the immediate physical sensation. Maya was demonstrating that her response was measured and controlled, not the unhinged violence that Jessica had expected from someone she viewed as inherently inferior. Even in the midst of revealing her capabilities, Maya maintained the kind of precision and restraint that came from years of professional training. "I could have ended this confrontation 30 seconds after it started," Maya continued, gradually releasing the pressure on Jessica's wrist while maintaining her grip. "I could have put all three of you on the ground before any of you understood what was happening. Instead, I tried to de-escalate, to find a peaceful resolution, to honor the promise I made to my mother about avoiding violence." Jessica rubbed her wrist as circulation returned, her face cycling through expressions of pain, humiliation, and dawning comprehension. Everything she thought she knew about power and control had been shattered in the space of a few minutes, replaced by the terrifying understanding that true capability often wore humble disguises. "But you've taught me something important today," Maya said, stepping back and giving Jessica space while maintaining her ready stance. "You've shown me that some people interpret kindness as weakness, that they view restraint as an invitation to escalate their aggression. You've demonstrated that trying to avoid conflict sometimes ensures that worse conflicts become inevitable." The bathroom door handle rattled suddenly, followed by knocking that made all four girls freeze. Ms. Thompson's voice carried through the reinforced wood, muffled but unmistakable. "Is everything all right in there? This door shouldn't be locked during school hours." Chloe looked desperately between Maya and the door, clearly torn between relief at potential rescue and terror about explaining their situation to a faculty member. Brianna had gone completely pale, probably calculating the social and academic consequences of being discovered in the middle of a harassment campaign gone wrong. Jessica opened her mouth to call for help, then stopped as she realized how she would explain the situation. How could she tell Ms. Thompson that she had cornered a scholarship student in a bathroom only to discover that her victim possessed the physical capability to destroy her? How could she admit that her carefully planned intimidation campaign had backfired so spectacularly? Maya moved to the door with fluid grace, her decision apparently already made. "We're fine, Ms. Thompson," she called out, her voice carrying just the right note of casual normalcy. "Just finishing up a group discussion for our literature project." "Well, you shouldn't have the door locked," came the reply. "Please open it and return to class immediately." Maya unlocked the door, but didn't open it immediately, instead turning back to face the three girls who had learned more about power dynamics in the last 10 minutes than in their entire privileged lives. "Here's what's going to happen," she said, her voice carrying quiet authority that none of them thought to challenge. "You're going to walk out of here and never speak of this incident to anyone. You're going to stop targeting scholarship students for harassment. And you're going to remember that some people's quiet exterior conceals capabilities you don't want to discover the hard way." Jessica nodded mutely, all her earlier arrogance replaced by genuine understanding of how catastrophically she had miscalculated. Chloe and Brianna nodded as well, their participation in future harassment campaigns effectively ended by what they had witnessed. Maya opened the door and stepped into the hallway, where Ms. Thompson waited with a concerned expression. "Is there a problem here?" the guidance counselor asked, looking between Maya's composed demeanor and the obviously shaken faces of the other three girls. "No problem at all," Maya replied smoothly. "We were just working through some communication issues, and I think we've reached a much better understanding." Miss Thompson's experienced eye recognized the signs of a resolved conflict, though she clearly suspected there was more to the story than she was being told. After a moment's evaluation, she nodded. "Very well. Please remember that bathroom doors should never be locked during class periods. Return to your classes immediately." The four girls dispersed in different directions, their paths diverging not just physically but fundamentally. Jessica, Chloe, and Brianna walked away with a new understanding of their own limitations and the dangerous assumptions they had been making about people they viewed as inferior. Maya headed toward her advanced chemistry class with the knowledge that her carefully constructed persona had been abandoned forever. Word spread through Westfield Academy's social networks with the speed that only teenage gossip could achieve, though the details were confused and contradictory. Some students whispered about a confrontation in the second-floor bathroom. Others talked about the scholarship girl who had somehow faced down Jessica Parker and her crew. The specifics varied with each retelling, but the essential message was clear. Maya Chen was not the helpless victim that everyone had assumed her to be. Over the following days, Maya noticed subtle changes in how other students interacted with her. Some gave her a wider berth in the hallways, uncertain what to make of the quiet girl who had somehow humbled the academy's most feared social predator. Others approached her with new respect. Scholarship students and social outcasts who had heard whispered versions of what had happened and recognized her as an unexpected ally. Jessica's behavior changed dramatically as well. The confident, mean girl who had terrorized underclassmen for years became noticeably more cautious. Her interactions with other students marked by a newfound awareness that not everyone was as helpless as she had assumed. The bathroom incident had taught her that privilege and wealth provided no protection against someone who possessed genuine capability and the willingness to use it. Maya's relationship with her mother required delicate navigation when Linda noticed the change in her daughter's demeanor. Maya had kept her promise to avoid seeking out conflict, but she had learned that sometimes conflict seeks you out regardless of your intentions. The conversation they had that evening was difficult but necessary, leading to a new understanding between them about the difference between being peaceful and being defenseless. The transformation Maya had undergone in that bathroom was irreversible. She could never again pretend to be the helpless scholarship student who needed protection from authority figures. But she had also learned that revealing her capabilities didn't have to mean abandoning her commitment to finding peaceful solutions to most conflicts. The key was understanding when restraint served a purpose and when it simply enabled aggression from people who interpreted kindness as weakness. Months later, Maya would reflect on that moment in the bathroom as the point when she stopped running from who she was and started integrating all aspects of her identity into a more authentic whole. She remained committed to academic excellence and peaceful conflict resolution, but she also accepted that some situations required a different kind of response than patient endurance. The quiet girl, who had once dominated regional championships, learned that true strength sometimes meant knowing when not to fight, but it also meant being ready to fight when necessary. In showing Jessica Parker and her followers exactly who they were dealing with, Maya had also discovered exactly who she was, beneath all her careful pretending. The bathroom, where she had been cornered by 3 privileged bullies, became the place where Maya Chen finally stopped hiding from herself and started living as the complete person she was meant to be. And Westfield Academy, for all its institutional protection of wealthy students, learned that some people possess power that can't be bought, influenced, or intimidated into submission. The sterile white tiles and harsh fluorescent lighting had witnessed the end of one story and the beginning of another. As a quiet scholarship student revealed herself to be someone far more complex and capable than anyone had imagined possible. 3 months after the bathroom incident that changed everything, Maya Chen stood in front of Westfield Academy's student council addressing a packed auditorium about the new peer mediation program she had helped establish. The girl who had once hidden in the shadows now commanded attention, not through fear or intimidation, but through the quiet authority that came from someone who had proven herself capable of standing up to any challenge while choosing to build, rather than destroy. The transformation in the school's social ecosystem had been gradual but undeniable. Students who had once cowered in hallways now walked with confidence, knowing that the culture of unchecked harassment had been fundamentally disrupted. The whispered stories about what had happened between Maya and Jessica Parker had taken on mythical qualities through repeated retellings, but the essential message remained consistent. There were consequences for cruelty, even for those who had always believed themselves untouchable. Maya's academic performance had improved dramatically once she stopped expending mental energy on maintaining her false persona of helplessness. Her literature essays drew praise from Professor Martinez, who noted that her writing had gained a depth and authenticity that elevated it above typical student work. Her chemistry lab reports demonstrated the same precision and attention to detail that had once made her a formidable competitor in the ring, translated now into academic excellence that no one could dismiss as undeserved. The scholarship students at Westfield had gravitated toward Maya naturally, recognizing in her someone who understood their struggles while possessing the strength to address them effectively. Emma Rodriguez, who had befriended Maya during her first difficult weeks, became her closest ally in establishing support networks for students from working-class backgrounds. Together, they created informal mentorship programs that helped new scholarship recipients navigate the complex social hierarchies without sacrificing their dignity or authentic selves. Jessica Parker's transformation had been perhaps even more dramatic than Maya's, though in a completely different direction. The bathroom confrontation had shattered her assumptions about power and privilege in ways that forced genuine self-reflection. For the first time in her life, the realization that she had built her identity around the ability to hurt people who couldn't fight back led to a crisis of conscience that ultimately resulted in significant changes to her behavior and priorities. Jessica's initial response had been denial and rage, directed not at Maya, but at herself for miscalculating so badly. She had spent weeks avoiding social interactions, unable to face the knowing looks from other students who sensed that something fundamental had shifted in the academy's power structure. Her grades suffered as she struggled to concentrate on academic work while processing the implications of discovering that her victim was actually her superior in every meaningful way. But gradually, Jessica began to understand that Maya's restraint in the bathroom had been an act of mercy rather than weakness. The scholarship student could have humiliated her completely, could have demonstrated her dominance in ways that would have destroyed Jessica's reputation permanently. Instead, Maya had chosen to teach rather than punish, to redirect rather than destroy. This realization forced Jessica to confront uncomfortable truths about her own character and the kind of person she had chosen to become. The change in Jessica's behavior was subtle at first. Fewer cutting remarks in class, less obvious exclusion of scholarship students from social events, a gradual reduction in the casual cruelty that had once defined her interactions with people she considered inferior. But as weeks passed, the transformation became more pronounced. She began volunteering for community service projects, initially as a way to rebuild her self-image, but gradually out of genuine desire to contribute positively to something larger than herself. Chloe Williams had responded to the bathroom incident by essentially withdrawing from Westfield's social scene entirely. The experience of watching Maya dismantle Jessica's authority had revealed to Chloe how little actual power she possessed despite her family's wealth. Her participation in harassment campaigns had been motivated by desperate insecurity about her own social position, and seeing that security revealed as illusory had left her unsure how to navigate the academy's complex hierarchies. Rather than seeking new alliances or attempting to rebuild her damaged social standing, Chloe focused on academic work and individual pursuits that didn't require her to position herself relative to other students. She discovered talents in digital art and computer programming that had been neglected while she devoted energy to social climbing. Gradually, she began to build genuine friendships based on shared interests rather than mutual participation in exclusion and harassment. Brianna Lee's restaurant family background had given her enough sophistication to recognize Maya's demonstration as a masterclass in controlled power, and she had emerged from the bathroom with genuine respect for someone who had chosen mercy over dominance. Unlike Chloe's withdrawal or Jessica's crisis of conscience, Brianna's response was to seek understanding of what she had witnessed and what it revealed about different forms of strength. Brianna began studying martial arts herself, not with the intention of becoming a fighter, but out of curiosity about the mindset and discipline that had allowed Maya to maintain such perfect control in a highly charged situation. She enrolled in a local taekwondo school where she learned about respect, restraint, and the responsibility that came with physical capability. The experience taught her to appreciate the choice Maya had made to walk away from competition while retaining the skills that made her formidable. The faculty at Westfield Academy had noticed the changes in their student body without fully understanding their origin. Disciplinary incidents decreased markedly as students who had previously engaged in harassment found new ways to occupy their time and energy. The guidance counselor's office, which had been overwhelmed with complaints about bullying and social exclusion, saw a dramatic reduction in crisis interventions. Ms. Thompson, who had interrupted the bathroom confrontation, suspected that Maya had played a role in the positive changes, but never pressed for details about what had actually occurred. Her experience with troubled teenagers had taught her to recognize when conflicts had been resolved authentically rather than simply suppressed, and the lasting nature of the behavioral changes suggested that whatever had happened had addressed root causes rather than surface symptoms. Principal Davidson found himself dealing with fewer angry phone calls from wealthy parents demanding special treatment for their children's disciplinary issues. The culture of entitlement that had once made his job a constant negotiation between educational standards and donor relations had given way to something approaching normal academic expectations. Students who had once expected immunity from consequences began accepting responsibility for their actions in ways that made the school actually function as an educational institution. Maya's relationship with her mother had evolved as Linda came to understand that her daughter's promise to avoid violence had been kept in spirit, even when circumstances forced her to reveal her capabilities. The conversation they had after Maya finally explained what had happened in the bathroom was difficult, but ultimately strengthening for both of them. Linda realized that trying to suppress Maya's identity as a fighter had been less effective than helping her daughter integrate that aspect of herself into a more complete whole. Linda's fears about Maya reverting to the violence-prone teenager she had been in California proved unfounded, as Maya demonstrated that knowing when not to fight was just as important as knowing how to fight. The incident with Jessica and her friends had actually reinforced Maya's commitment to peaceful conflict resolution by showing her that true strength included the wisdom to choose appropriate responses to different situations. The kickboxing gym, where Maya had spent her childhood, contacted her after Master Rodriguez learned about her enrollment at Westfield Academy. He invited her to visit during winter break, not to resume competition, but to reconnect with the part. of her journey that had shaped her character. Maya accepted, recognizing that honoring her past didn't require returning to it, but did require acknowledging the positive aspects of her training and the values it had instilled. During her visit to the gym, Maya worked with younger students who were struggling with aggression and discipline issues similar to those she had faced. She discovered that teaching others about controlled power and responsible strength gave her a way to honor her fighting background while contributing to something constructive. The experience planted seeds for future involvement in martial arts as a mentor rather than a competitor. Maya's academic trajectory at Westfield had stabilized into genuine excellence rather than the desperate overachievement that had characterized her first months at the academy. Her college applications showcased not just impressive grades and test scores, but also leadership in peer mediation, community service, and mentorship programs that demonstrated character development beyond academic accomplishment. The essay she wrote for her college applications about overcoming personal challenges was honest about her athletic background while focusing on the lessons she had learned about strength, restraint, and the responsibility that came with capability. The piece impressed admissions officers not just for its authentic voice, but for its demonstration of self-awareness and personal growth. Several Ivy League universities offered Maya full scholarships, recognizing in her the kind of student who would contribute positively to campus culture while achieving academic distinction. The opportunities that opened to her were based on merit rather than family connections, validating her mother's sacrifices and her own commitment to building a better future through education and personal development. Emma Rodriguez, who had become Maya's closest friend at Westfield, often marveled at the changes in the school's social environment since Maya's arrival. The culture of fear that had once dominated interactions between different social groups had been replaced by something approaching mutual respect. Students from wealthy families were learning to interact with scholarship recipients as equals rather than objects of charity or targets for harassment. The peer mediation program that Maya had helped establish became a model for other elite institutions struggling with similar social dynamics. The program's success lay not in its formal structure, but in its foundation, on the understanding that true authority came from moral strength rather than inherited privilege. Students trained in mediation learned to address conflicts through dialogue and mutual respect rather than power plays and intimidation. Maya's reputation spread beyond Westfield Academy as word of the peer mediation program's effectiveness reached other schools. She received invitations to speak at educational conferences about addressing bullying in elite institutions, sharing insights about the importance of authentic leadership and the difference between enforced compliance and genuine respect. The bathroom where Maya's transformation had occurred became symbolically significant for many students at Westfield, though few knew the specific details of what had happened there. Students who had been targets of harassment began to see it as a place where the old order had been challenged and defeated, where someone had finally stood up to the culture of entitlement that had made their lives miserable. Maya herself rarely thought about that specific confrontation, viewing it instead as one moment in a longer journey toward integrating all aspects of her identity into a coherent whole. The girl who had once hidden her fighting background now understood that strength could be expressed through protection rather than domination, through building up rather than tearing down. As graduation approached, Maya reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since that first day when she had hoped to remain invisible throughout her time at Westfield Academy. Instead of hiding in the shadows, she had become a leader whose influence would outlast her presence at the school. The system she had helped establish, the cultural changes she had catalyzed, and the example she had set would continue to benefit future students long after she left for college. the scholarship students who would arrive at Westfield in coming years would inherit a very different environment than the one Maya had encountered. The culture of unchecked harassment had been replaced by expectations of mutual respect and accountability. The informal support networks Maya had helped establish would continue to help new students navigate social challenges without sacrificing their dignity or authentic selves. Jessica Parker's transformation continued throughout senior year as she grappled with redefining her identity around positive contributions rather than social dominance. Her college applications focused on community service and personal growth, acknowledging past mistakes while demonstrating genuine commitment to becoming a better person. The bathroom incident that had humiliated her ultimately became the catalyst for positive changes that made her a stronger and more compassionate individual. Maya's final speech to the student body at graduation focused not on her own achievements, but on the collective responsibility all students shared for creating inclusive and respectful communities. She challenged her classmates to recognize that true strength lay in lifting others up rather than tearing them down, in using whatever advantages they possessed to create opportunities for those who had fewer resources. The standing ovation that followed Maya's speech came not just from scholarship students and social outcasts, but from across the entire social spectrum of Westfield Academy. Students who had once dismissed her as insignificant now recognized her as someone whose quiet strength had transformed their school for the better. Even students from the wealthiest families applauded someone who had shown them that power without compassion was ultimately hollow and destructive. As Maya walked across the stage to receive her diploma, she carried with her the knowledge that she had honored both her promise to her mother and her commitment to her authentic self. She had proven that it was possible to be both peaceful and strong, both compassionate and formidable. The girl who had once hidden her capabilities out of fear had learned to integrate them into a more complete and effective approach to life's challenges. The bathroom confrontation that had changed everything was now just one chapter in a larger story about finding the courage to be authentic while maintaining the wisdom to choose appropriate responses to different situations. Maya Chen had stopped running from who she was and started building the person she wanted to become, creating ripple effects that would benefit others long after she had moved on to new challenges. In the end, the quiet scholarship student had taught an entire institution that true power came not from wealth or status, but from character, capability, and the wisdom to use both in service of something larger than oneself. The legacy she left at Westfield Academy was not one of fear or intimidation, but of strength deployed in service of justice and compassion. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.